Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we are going to talk about the seventh house in astrology. So, the last couple episodes we've looked at, I've been mentioning how we're now looking at houses on the western half of the chart and how that represents or has an element of kind of collective or other people-centricness to each of the houses, right? They all deal with other people as kind of a primary motivator or function or contributor to the houses and what they signify, right? They deal with other people. There's other involvement. But why is that, right? Why the western half? Why is it like that? Well, we're going to discuss that today because it's going to be accentuated by the seventh house. Seventh house is kind of the pinnacle of that otherness, and I want to explain why that is, as well as introduce a dynamic that's going to be that we will see in all of the houses as we move forward over the next several episodes, because every house from this point forward is going to be in opposition to a house that we've already covered. And so the seventh house really exemplifies that, and is probably the most prominent example, probably takes its meaning from that, maybe the greatest. So I want to discuss that in depth today, that oppositional effect, because it's really, really key to understanding the seventh house. So let's dive in. Let's figure out what the seventh house is about, why other people are centric to it, as well as this oppositional effect. So if we start with the astronomy, which we always want to do, right, where is the seventh house? Well, it's the western horizon, right? What does that mean then in terms of what else we can figure out about the house? Well, it's angular, for one, so it's a prominent area of life. And number two, it's in opposition, as I've already mentioned, to the first house. And we can see this just from the astronomy alone. We don't even have to look at a chart or anything else, right? If we look at the eastern horizon, which represents the first house, right, the ascendant, where things are rising above the horizon. 180 degrees from that, or if we just look the other direction, we see the western horizon, where the exact opposite thing happens, right? Everything is now setting. It's moving below the horizon. And so there's a couple qualities here I want to note. Number one, in the east, we see where light first begins, where visibility first begins, and things get brighter as they go. They get more prominent, more visible as they go. On the western horizon, you have the opposite effect. Things are shrinking in their light, shrinking in their visibility until they ultimately disappear below the horizon. So on the one hand, you have kind of the beginning of the day, or the beginning of life, if you will, the beginning of light, the beginning of visibility. And the other side, you have the end of visibility, right? The end of life, the end of light. So that's going to be the main thing we notice here. But what does that mean from an astrological standpoint, right? And actually, before we unpack that, let's talk about this dynamic of opposition here, because we just talked about it. There's opposites. We're looking at opposite effects. And I want to talk about this sense of what an opposite is specifically so we can understand the opposition. Now, you might think that's kind of a stupid question, right? If you're an adult, you almost certainly know what an opposite is. But let's just get a clear definition, because I think it's important. So what's an opposite? Opposite is two things that are, right, different in their nature, or different. Let's just start with that. Two things that are different, right? But more specifically, they're two things that are different, that are of the same nature, right? Okay, what does that mean? Well, let's look at directions, right? If I say go north, but also go left, right? Are those opposites? No, they're not. They're totally different ways of looking at direction, right? One is cardinal direction, something you'd look at on a map, kind of really it's relative to the earth. Whereas if I say go left, right, up, down, what have you, forward, backwards, that's locational, right? It's relative to where you are specifically right now. You could be anywhere on the earth, and turning left will be a totally different cardinal direction, right? They're not related. They're two different natures. So that's the first thing. Opposites have to be of the same nature. Second thing, they have to be mutually exclusive, right? We see this with the eastern and western horizon. If something's rising, it can't also be setting at the same time, right? It can either be one or the other. It cannot be both, at least not simultaneously. Going back to our example of directions, you cannot go up and down at the same time. You can, however, go up and then immediately go down afterwards. That's possible. But you can't be both simultaneously. And so that's the key. Same nature, right? So we understand we're talking about something in the same vein. And number two, mutually exclusive. Can't be simultaneously existing. So then going back to the astrology, right? The seventh house. What does it represent? Well, it is opposition to the first, which means it's going to embody those same qualities that I just mentioned. It's going to be of the same nature, and it's going to be mutually exclusive. We see this in the astronomy, right? Rising and setting, beginning of light, ending of light, or beginning of visibility, ending of visibility. Let's start with those. What does that represent? Well, we've discussed, if you remember from our episode on the first house, that the first house is going to represent the self and the beginning of life and visibility, right? That's what the eastern horizon represents. So that means then that the seventh house is going to represent what? The ending of visibility, the ending of life, the ending of the self. In ancient times, they certainly would have attributed kind of the literal ending of the self, right? Ending of life, as kind of a very literal interpretation. I don't like to get into the topic of death because A, it's very complex and nuanced. It's something I haven't really studied, but it's not as straightforward as just saying the seventh house represents death, because it doesn't. It's not that straightforward. So if you ever have transits to the seventh, don't be freaked out, because that's not how it works. But that said, it does represent a metaphorical end, if you will, right? The end of the self means it's where my boundary stops. For example, we take our physical bodies, or we, as we understand ourselves, exist physically up to the point of what? The edge of our skin. And anything beyond our skin, as we move outward, is no longer a part of us. Right? Maybe our hair, if you want to go that far. But that's it. Everything beyond that is no longer ourself. And so that's the limit. That's the end of the self. So metaphorically, the seventh house is going to be the end of the self, or rather where the self does not exist. Right? And even more specifically, it's going to show then what we are not. If the first house shows what I am, and what, right, I've referenced this before, the first house you could think of as like the boat that we are on, the kind of sailing the river of life. Right? It's the type of boat that we are. And the planets and the other houses kind of represent the different parts of the boat and the different sailors and the captain and all that stuff. But the first house is kind of like the boat itself. Well, the seventh house is another boat. It's not our boat, it's somebody else's boat. Or it's other things, right, that are on the ocean. And if they're other things, they're other boats, that means they are inherently not us. And I can be one type of boat, but if I see another type of boat, that means I am not that thing, right? So the seventh house is going to show what we are not, right? If I am a speedboat, then I am not going to be carrying a bunch of cargo. I don't have the capacity. I'm not built for it. Right? If I'm a battleship, I'm not going to be taking people on cruises. It's not what I'm geared for. I'm geared for war, right? And so the seventh house shows what we are not relative to the first house. which means the seventh house is going to represent the qualities we do not have, but it's also going to show the qualities that we need in a lot of ways. What do I mean by this? Well, let's go back to this idea of polarity, right? Mutual exclusiveness. Let me give an example. If I want to, let's say I'm having a party, right, for my kids, and I want to have some balloons, because kids love balloons and they love to play with them, especially little kids, especially when they can kind of hover around, right? Kind of stay around, like not eye level for them, but, close enough where they can reach them and they can hit them and kind of bat them around and all that kind of thing. Well, if I want to do that, right, what do I need first? First, I need a balloon. So I fill it up with helium. But the thing is if you fill up a balloon with helium, what happens? Right? The balloon floats up. It goes up. That's the nature of it. Right? Do the physics involved. But the balloon will go up, and that's its nature, is to move upwards when it's filled with helium. And so I could do that, but if I only have something that's moving up, right, unless I'm trying to go up also, it's not really helpful for me. So then what do? I take something that's heavy, maybe a rock, maybe, a small piece of, like a popsicle stick or something small. It's not going to hurt my kids. And I tie it to the balloon. Why? Well, the nature of any object that isn't filled with helium is to do what when I drop it? It's to go down with gravity, right? Everything that's solid is beholden to gravity. And so that means its nature is to go down when it's in the air. And the thing is if I want something to float, right, I can't have it be solid, because otherwise its nature is to go down. So I need both somehow, right? I need it both up and down because I want it that equilibrium. So what do? You tie the popsicle stick or whatever it ends up being to the balloon. So now you have a balance, right? Especially if you can get the proportions correct. You have a balance, and what happens when you have a balance between the weight and the balloon? It kind of floats in the middle of the air a little bit, and it kind of bobs around. Now the kids can play with it, and they can hit it, and it'll kind of slowly float, and then kind of come back down very slowly, but kind of also stay, a little up a little bit. It's got that kind of weird equilibrium, right? But I get to that point because I find balance between the two opposites, the two polarities. And so that's the nature of the seventh house. It's going to show what we are not, in a lot of ways what we lack by nature of who we are, and how we can find balance by attaining that extra quality. So there's a couple implications from this. Number one, the seventh house is going to, in some ways, kind of show what each sign is looking for, what it really wants. Right? Let's take an example or two. Let's look at a Leo rising. What's a Leo rising? Leo is about the sun, right? It's the center. It wants to self-express through the self. So it wants to show off. It wants to be seen. It also wants to be in charge, because the central figure tends to what? Have sway. You think of the sun, the solar system. What does it do? It has the gravitational pull. Everything revolves around it. So what does that mean for Leo, right, in terms of what it wants? It wants things around it. It can't be seen if there's nothing to see it. It can't have authority if there's nothing to command. It can't have influence if there's nothing to influence. And so what is the opposite to Leo? It's Aquarius. What is Aquarius? It's the eclectic. It's everything that isn't the center. It's decentralized. It's the common person. So what does Leo want? It wants Aquarius. Why? Because Aquarius represents those qualities that Leo is not. Right? It has those qualities that Leo is not. And so there's an element to what Aquarius has and what Aquarius is that balances out Leo, that balances out Leo, that gives Leo what it wants, what it needs. On the flip side, right, There's two ways you can kind of go about this. Number one, you can go the more healthy way, which is to get it in balance, to pursue the thing in balance, right? Go back to the balloon. You put too much helium relative to the weight you're tying it to, it's going to continue to float away again. Alternatively, you get too heavy an object, it's just going to be stuck. And it won't really float, right? And that's the nature of the seventh houses. It's going to be something that we have to kind of reach for, but in a certain moderation. Also, like any other house in our charts, first house included, every sign has positive and negative qualities. And so with the seventh house, we have to recognize, am I looking for the positive qualities of the sign, or am I looking for the negative qualities of the sign? Let's take Leo again, right? If Leo's the first house, so that means Aquarius is seventh. What is Aquarius? What are some of the positive things of Aquarius? Right? Eclectic, for sure. Innovative. It's intelligent. But it's a servant. Because Aquarius understands and resonates with the people. It understands the common man, the common woman. It understands the common person because it is common. Right? And so for Leo, if it really wants to understand and get, right, the attention that it desires, the command that it desires, the sway that it desires, it has to understand how to what? How to resonate with the common person. Right? A very easy way to see this is any good leader, because Leo is leader. It's the king. It's the queen, right? Any good leader in history has always had an ability, or at least good leader in the sense of for the people, has always understood what the people wanted, what the people needed, and understood how to resonate with the people, right? That's the Leo quality that is now reaching out and tapping into its seventh house in a positive way. On the flip side, right, what happens? You could chase after the seventh house in a way that is negative. What does that mean? Right? Let's take Leo again, just because we're doing Leo here, so might as well follow through with it. What's negative representation of Aquarius? It's authoritarian, right? It's a fixed sign. It gets rigid in its thinking. So with a Leo, you could have somebody who projects their will in a way that's very fixed. And Leo's a fixed sign too, but in a way where they know what's best. Right? Let me tell you what to do, without taking into consideration those things. Another way it could project is it can diminish itself. It can try to become Aquarius. Instead of resonating with the people as a way to serve them through its leadership, it says, oh, I'll just humble myself and try to just serve everyone, because that's what Aquarius naturally tries to do. It's a servant, or at least it's very servant-hearted. So you get a Leo that abdicates its authority, right? Its leadership capacity, and says, I'll just be one of the common people in an attempt to get that. And that goes back to the idea of attraction, right? If you remember back from the Venus episode, what does Venus show? It shows how we attract what we want. Why? Because when we attract, or when we value something, we tend to surround ourselves with that thing. We tend to try to show off ourselves in a way so that we attract it. For example, if I want to, let's say I value people of a particular sports team, right? I think fans of a particular sports team are really cool, right? They're just, I don't know, for whatever reason, right? Let's just pick a city I've never been to. I'm a fan of that sports team. And I think the people that live there are just so cool. But I'm not from there, right? I don't know anything. I'm just getting into the sport. So if I want to meet those people because I value them and I want to be like them, what do? You imitate them. You wear the team gear, right? You go to the team games, root for them, right? You wouldn't show up to the game wearing the other team's uniform, other team's jersey, or anything like that, right? That doesn't make sense. Then you're attracting the wrong thing. People will think you're a different fan. So you wear the stuff of the team you're rooting for, right? Why? Because then people kind of attracted to you. And that's the same thing with the seventh house, right? It's got this quality of how we attract things, in a sense, or what we are attracted to. And so we will try to imitate what we are attracted to, in a sense. Why? Because it's what we are not. So we can't be it completely. So we try to imitate it. We try to project it. So the seventh house is going to show how we project things. And that's one of the hardest qualities of any opposition, is this tendency to project. And that projection can both be the positive and the negative qualities. Usually the negative, but so seventh house is going to show how we project what we are not onto other people. Let's look at another example. Virgo rising. So Virgo has Pisces in the seventh house, right? Virgo tends to grow up in an atmosphere, not always, but there's a tendency to grow up in a situation where it doesn't really get a good sense of conditional love, right? Unconditional love. It tends to learn that love is very conditional. What can you get rewarded, you get seen when you do something for me, right? It has Leo in the 12th house. So its sense of self-expression is a bit hidden. And so the natural thing then that Virgos tend to want is what? It's an attachment that is limitless, unconditional. The nature of Pisces is to just love everything. Why? Because it just absorbs everything into the whole. Everything's equal. Everything's a part, right? And when everything's a part of itself, right, when everything is all together, there's no distinguishing. So it doesn't distinguish between the good or the bad, or the ugly or the beautiful. It just simply accepts everything. And so Virgo really wants that unconditional acceptance that Pisces is capable of, just very naturally. And so what then Virgos can do and are prone to is projecting, right, that unconditional love, but in a way that's, again, it's an imitation. So how does that work in practice? In practice, what you see a lot of times with Virgos until they really kind of work through their own stuff, and that's going to take different periods of time for different people, but they tend to be a doormat, right? I want to be loved unconditionally, so I'm just going to do what the imitation of that is, which is, right, do everything for everybody. Because if I'm doing things for people, maybe they will love me, right? Which just harkens back to their own issue that they had to begin with. It's a projection. And so the seventh house is going to show how we project what we want and what we are not onto other people, which means the seventh house is going to represent relationships in a lot of ways. And I've kind of very convoluted way of getting here, but the seventh house represents relationships. That's why it is a house that a lot of people love to look at. In kind of pop, TikTok, YouTube, kind of astrology, maybe Facebook, I don't know, I don't do Facebook. But you see a lot of emphasis on the seventh as far as marriage. Why? Because what is a partner? It's not me, right? It's somebody else. It's another individual. And another individual is inherently not myself, which means it's an opposite. It's a polarity. So the seventh house represents not just what we aren't in terms of our personal qualities, but it represents the other people in our life, but in a very individual, personal relationship kind of way. The seventh house is going to represent personal relationships. And since I'm going back to this idea of projection, it's showing what we tend to project and how we tend to interact with other people on an interpersonal level. So the seventh house is going to represent relationships. It's going to represent what we aren't and what we tend to want, which means it's going to represent what we want from others in relationships. But it's also going to represent how we interact then within those relationships and the dynamics of them. The seventh house is going to show a polarity that allows for something that complements you. So let's look at another example, a Sagittarius rising. What does Sagittarius rising want from a partner? Right? Sagittarius has a lot of experiences. Why? Because its MO is to just go and do everything so it can learn and get experience and kind of really find meaning. It's trying to find meaning in the world and in itself. And it does that through just simply experiencing everything. But once it kind of finds that truth, Sagittarius really wants to tell everybody. It gets excited. It says, hey, I know this thing. I figured this out. Let me tell you about it. And it can be very simple, basic stuff throughout its daily life, or it can be really, really crazy, groundbreaking stuff, theological, philosophical, right? Whatever. But Sagittarius wants to share what it knows because it's experienced a lot and it's wise. And it's excited and it's passionate. It's the teacher in many ways. So what does it want then? It wants somebody that can listen to it, right? And which sign is the best listener? It's Gemini. Right? People think Geminis are just talkative, chat your ear off. Yeah, they will for sure. But they are also very good listeners when they embody what? Their own seventh house. Why does Sagittarius want Gemini? It wants somebody to talk to that can hear it, that can hear what it has to say, who's a student, who's willing to learn. Hey, I have these experiences. Gemini, on the flip side, what does it want? It wants partners that have experience because Gemini studies everything. It studies people subtly, subconsciously. It's always picking up details from everywhere. You talk to anybody with a lot of Gemini placements and they will know a lot of things about a lot of things. Because they're always learning. And so what they want is somebody who has the experience to show them the ropes. Because the issue for Gemini is they're inherently unstable, right? They've got Taurus in the 12th house. And so having somebody who has experienced life allows them to kind of flesh out and figure out and find that stability. Hey, if this person knows what they're doing, I can trust them. So I kind of went off on a lot of tangents on examples here, but let's rein this back in and kind of consolidate. So the seventh house represents what we are not, which means it therefore represents other people, right? Other individuals. So it's going to represent personal relationships. It's also going to represent the qualities that we do not have in a very mutually exclusive sense. And it therefore represents the things we tend to project, the ways we tend to project what we are not in an effort to get it, right? To imitate it, to attract it. It's also going to show the ways in which we operate within a relationship. Again, it goes to the idea of the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Or put in easier terms, treat others as you want them to treat you. That's the dynamic of the seventh house, is we all tend to embody that kind of just naturally. So whatever sign you have in the first, you're going to naturally kind of play out the seventh house sign in some way. And so the challenge then is learning to do it, or learning to do the qualities that are good. Because when you can do that, that's when you can really learn to relate to other people. And relating to other people is an extremely important quality. It's foundational. That's why this is an angular house. Because at the end of the day, humans, yes, we're individuals, but we are a collective species. Humans have a deep need for others. I don't want to say dependency, but they have a deep need for socialization, a deep need for connection, right? And the seventh house shows where we are deficient, where we are not something, and where we want that thing. And so that tends to be how we act it out as a way of getting it. So the challenge is to learn to act it out in the proper way. It also means it's going to represent the close individual partnerships themselves. So the seventh house will represent close relationships in our life. Very obviously, that's going to represent things like marriage. That's why it's such a popular house for people to look at, especially younger people, I think. So it's going to represent what qualities we want in a partner, number one. But it's not going to represent our partner themselves. That's a kind of more convoluted topic because there's a lot that goes into it. You'd have to look at the ruler of the seventh house, as well as planets within the seventh house and so forth. But generally speaking, the seventh is going to show marriage. It's going to show close partnerships. That could be a business partnership, a best friend, right? Or if you have a strong relationship with a sibling or something of that nature. It's also going to show enemies. Why? Because what is an enemy? It's the opposite to you. It's the person you are in, right, close contention with. So enemies in a very individual sense. Sixth house, I think, in some ways also kind of represents enemies more broadly. Right? Why? Because it's the house of obstacles, and enemies certainly provide obstacles. Rivals, that might be a better term for the seventh house dynamic. So the seventh house is going to represent our personal relationships, the other people involved in those relationships. It doesn't represent people on a collective level, though. We'll see that as we look at the 11th house once we get there. So that's kind of the main gist. That's the main thing about the seventh house. I really wanted to focus in on kind of the more personal aspect because I know, like I said, a lot of people look at it, kind of pop astrology, and just look at it and say, oh, it's the house of marriage, or it's the house of relationships. This is your love life. It's not really your love life. It's just how you relate, period. And how you relate is a function of what you are not and who you are. Right? And who you were built to be, and all the patterns you pick up along the way. And so, as a result of all that quality, all those things, it kind of puts you in a position where, hey, I'm looking for something. Because nobody is perfect. Nobody is fully fleshed out. We all have imperfections. We all have deficiencies. And so that's why we look for something that kind of complements and fits that part of our life. In terms of how the seventh relates to the other houses, obviously it's in opposition to the first, which we've talked about, right? Pretty much ad nauseum. In terms of the squares, it is square the 10th and it is square the 4th. This makes sense because in both cases you have dynamics where close relationships are pivotal to the formation or destruction of those houses. In the 4th house, you have the home and family, right? So close relationships with people are not only going to be, especially in your early life, kind of built up through how you relate to your family or through the example that your parents set for you in terms of how to relate to people, right? And that's going to influence then your own 7th house. But as you get older and you start to date or you start to have friends or you start to do other things where you are involved with other people in a very personal way, that's going to influence your home life, especially if you meet somebody that you eventually date or marry or move in with, maybe even start a family with. In the 10th house, you have your career. And there's a saying, especially in a lot of industries, where it's not what you know, but who you know. Right? And that's not always true, but it's true a lot of the time. Why? Because at the end of the day, a career, a public reputation is built on how do you relate to people? Do you treat them like dirt? Or do you treat them with respect? Right? If you're a very respectful person, if it's natural that it kind of love and respect outflows from you, that's naturally going to be something people tend to love and respect. And there's other qualities, obviously, too, but as just an example. Alternatively, another aspect of is if you get married, for example, that's usually a pretty public thing. You have a wedding a lot of times, and that's a very public event where other people now see this partnership. And so that's, again, another part of that 10th house square. What about the trine houses? The trine houses from the 7th are going to be the 11th and the third house. Let's talk about the 11th first. The 11th is the house of friends and social groups and hopes and dreams. And so there's a natural resonance, right? The trine is a very easy flow. And so one kind of begets the other. So what happens if your seventh house represents how you relate to people in a personal way? That is naturally going to influence, right, the types of friends and type of social circles you have and the types of people you meet and that stay within your kind of social sphere. It's also going to kind of indirectly influence how you're able to achieve your goals, or if you're able to achieve your goals, and how you move towards them. Why? Because it's going to put people in your life who can either support or hinder that. The other aspect is going to be third house, which again is another social area of life. Why? Because third house represents your local space, and by extension, it represents the people in your local space that you see on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, that you see frequently. And again, how you relate to people is going to be very pivotal in influencing that area of your life. And as you, right, the way the trine kind of flows back to the seventh from those two houses is as you meet people, right, that will influence your own relationships. Maybe you meet people that do things a certain way and it changes the way your perspective on things. Or obviously, as you meet new people, they become more important in your own life, like a spouse, for example. What about the sextile houses? The sextile houses are going to be the 5th and the 9th. So the 5th house is the house of creation, right? Creativity, but also romance and games and fun and passion. And one of the things is being a social species, humans like to do things together, right? So how you relate to people is naturally going to influence A, your romantic life, but B, it's going to influence how you do in those kinds of things, right? It's going to provide opportunity there for competition, for fun, pleasure, right? Having fun with other people, competing with other people, maybe playing sports or something. Or also, right, again, kind of similar to the 11th house, it's going to provide opportunity for growth in that area. Why? Because when you meet other people, they can give you things that you didn't have before. Whether that's physically give you something, or whether it's just they're imparting wisdom in some way, just by simply rubbing shoulders with them. On the other side, you have the 9th house. The 9th house is about what? Our worldview, our belief systems. It's how we grow ourselves beyond the boundaries of who we are. And when you have close relationships with people, that absolutely gives opportunity to change your beliefs, to challenge them, and to challenge you, right? There's I can't remember the specific verse off the top of my head, but there's a quote from the Bible that's, right, as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, or one person sharpens another. What does that mean? It means that people naturally, as we kind of work together, be around each other, right? We're different. We're going to challenge each other at some point. But that causes growth, right? That makes us both better. And that's the nature in a lot of ways of the 7th house and its interactions with all of the other kind of areas of life. The 9th house is no different. It provides opportunity for growth through these personal relationships. And also, 9th house is going to represent faraway places, right? As you go to new places, experience new things, what happens? You meet new people. It expands the capacity for relating. Finally, we get to the houses in aversion. That's going to be the 6th, the 8th, the 12th, and the 2nd. Let's start with the 6th house. What is the 6th house? As we talked about last week, it's about crisis, it's about conflict, it's about obstacles, and it's about servitude. And when you are serving or being served, that means there is inherently another person involved. But that is an uncomfortable dynamic because there is now a hierarchy whether implicit or explicit, right? And it's usually difficult. It's challenging. And this is why it's in aversion, is because it's something that isn't really pleasant. Right? It's just an uncomfortable thing you kind of have to do. It's also baked into very close partnerships, right? Especially things like marriage, where serving the other person is kind of inherent in keeping and maintaining the relationship a little bit. On the other side, you have the 8th house, which is going to represent shared resources, taboo subjects, death, but more in a kind of the subject of death. And also, right, a lot of psychological crisis. So how does that make sense? Well, it has very little in common, first of all, with the 7th house. But number 2, much like the 2nd house is our personal resources, we now have the 2nd from the 7th representing the resources of what? The resources of somebody else, right? And again, that's something that's personal to them. It's uncomfortable. The other 2 aversion houses are going to be the 12th and the 2nd. The 2nd, as I just mentioned, is our personal resources. And what I personally own, right, is not really something I tend to naturally share with somebody else. If I do, that's where it kind of transfers to the 8th house a little bit. But that's, again, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing. We don't go around just exposing to everybody all of our own personal belongings, right? We are private people, some more so than others. And the other part of that, too, is that the 2nd house represents our personal values, right? It's our support systems. And the 7th house is going to represent other people, which means those are people who are either going to influence them or support, or act as that support. So it can kind of be helpful, but not always. Sometimes it's got that in conjunction dynamic of frustration where it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes there, sometimes not. On the other side, you have the 12th house. The 12th house represents solitude and isolation and subconscious and loss and spirituality. And obviously, if you're solitude, you're alone, right? Aloneness and other people don't really go hand in hand. It's hard to relate to somebody when you're alone, when you're isolated, right? And so that's why they are in conjunct. They have nothing in common, really. So that's the 7th house, right? To kind of brief sum up. 7th house represents what we are not. It represents the qualities that we tend to want and need to complete ourselves, to make ourselves full, fulfilled. I don't want to say fulfilled, that's probably the wrong word, but more complete and kind of they complement us. And so that means it's going to be the qualities we look for in our partnerships and our relationships, as well as the ways in which we imitate those qualities, right? To kind of embody them so that we get them from other people. It also then is going to represent the other people that we come into. But it's only on the interpersonal relationship. So it can be any other person, as long as you're in a close relationship with them. And it's going to show how we interact in those close relationships. So that's the 7th house. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, or if you're looking for a reading, right, you want to have somebody look at your own 7th house, help you understand that part of your life better. I am a practicing astrologer. You can reach out to me. My email is james@jdastrology.com. Alternatively, you could just go to my website and reach out to me there, jdastrology.com. But anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the week.